Good morning. Let's continue to talk about one-step sparring. One-step sparring is broken. Let's fix it. I ended my last video with what I call my call to action, my guiding light in this. You cannot develop black belt level skill against white belt level resistance. This works in everything, all right? For example, you want to be a sprinter, right? You want to be a world-class sprinter. Let's take this even lower. You want to be a high school champion sprinter, all right? You're not going to get that by just jogging, even if you jog for miles and miles. Yes, I know if you're an absolute beginner and you're unconditioned, you will improve your sprint, but you're going to reach a point of diminishing returns where you were out of shape, now you're in shape, right? And then you test your sprint, and you're like, okay, well, I'm faster. Keep doing this. Add more mileage, only jog slowly. It's just not going to do much for you. At some point, you do less jogging, focus on your sprinting, right? You can't get sprinting level speed indefinitely to high levels by just jogging. Let's say you're out of shape and you want to put on muscle. You want to look good. You want to build some pecs, right? You want to build lats and tree trunk legs, right? And you do body weight exercises. You do push-ups, you do pull-ups, you do free squats, and you jog. Yes, at first you will put on muscle, especially if you're male, especially if you are out of shape, okay? There's going to be a point when you're not going to be able to get as much muscular hypertrophy from that as from lifting weights, or even just enhancing your calisthenics, elevating your feet for a push-up. Later on, elevating your feet for a push-up with a backpack on, right? You're walking uphill, running uphill. Later on, you wear a weight vest, you put on a rucksack, you increase the amount of resistance. Same thing with bench press, adding bench press. There are people out there benching 300 pounds. It's very difficult for someone who maybe, only weighs 95 pounds to work up to 300 pounds of resistance on a push-up, right? You can't get power lifter level strength and bodybuilder level, thick bodybuilder level hypertrophy from just push-ups. And you cannot develop black belt skill from white belt level resistance. It's the same thing in martial arts. When you first start martial arts and you learn one steps, it is very difficult learning where to put your hand, how to stop your punch 1 inch from the person's nose or solar plexus, but yet have full power, full speed, so on and so forth. It is not easy. But it gets easy rather fast. It's not that difficult. If you practice at any dojo for a couple of months and, pass your first test, your white belt, and let's say your school uses stripes, and to get the stripe on your white belt, you've got to do 3 months. You've got to learn your one steps, right? You've got to learn your basic kicks, yada yada. That first test is difficult. Let's say there's another stripe involved, or a yellow belt. By the time the sun's coming out, by the time you get to yellow belt, all right, it's very easy for you to do one steps. I know they get more complicated as the belt levels go up, but you're kind of only developing your ability to memorize the new routine and maybe do new maneuvers that are a little bit more taxing or high level, but you're not really developing the other attributes implied in defending against the punch, the defensive attributes. Now, what I'm going to do is move this table, folks, because the sun is coming up quick, and the leaves are moving, and you're not going to be able to see my face, so please forgive me, okay? Let's get a couple things moved. Move this table. Okay, and you can see me a little bit better. I'm moving closer to you. Now, what I'm going to say next is heavily influenced by my time in all of my early martial arts, but especially at the American Karate Institute in Hamilton, New Jersey. Head instructor was Rick Hahn. It was formerly known as Dwyer's Institute of American Karate, and the style was called the Way of the Sphere, okay? And they had an interesting way of training things. and we can adapt it. We can make it more streetwise, or we can make it more sportive, or we can make it more kung fu, depending on technical elements. But the philosophy, the validity of it is the same. We'd get in a fighter stance, and they had a weird fighter stance where the rear hand was like this instead of this, and it was around your solar plexus, and this was here, and this is how you were lined up, and you were in basically a back stance, but with no weight on the front leg, but your front foot was flat. It looked like a mixture between Korean and Okinawan methodology, which I think it was. All right. So initially you learned what were called expressions, not techniques, and they were one steps. And the basic principle was either you get out of the way and you hit, or you hit and get out of the way at this basic level. And initially you learned about 4 of them, and I think there were 10 that were commonly taught. But I'm not going to go through all of them, but you get the idea. And you did your expression, and then you did something called a recovery, where you maneuvered behind the person and put your hand on one of his shoulders, and you were rear weighted and you were ready for the next move. And the whole idea was that if there was continuing resistance from the person, you had gotten to their blind spot. Or if there were other attackers, you could use this person, you could whack them and throw them into someone. And I use this in actual real life. It works. All right. And then once you learned these one steps, the next level, as you went up in your training, was kind of a free response. You were required to do at first 3 and later on a minimum of 5 techniques after your expression or during your expression that was totally up to you. All right. And we did many scenarios. Sometimes we'd make a circle in class and somebody would have to go in the middle. This was the most common methodology. And the instructor would point at people or look at them or use verbal commands, and they would attack you at all unexpected angles. And you had to adapt your expressions to attacks from all these angles. And they were initially one step through punches, or what I called BDP, the big dumb punch. The punch that any white belt can learn how to block and develop kind of control over. All right. But here's where it got interesting. As time went by, the attacks got more varied. If you had 3 stripes on your belt, people were allowed to come at you with a lead punch, what you often call kizamizuki in traditional karate-do. Or they could come at you with a reverse punch. A lot of them weren't in that habit. They come at you with a skip side kick, a back leg roundhouse kick, a skip roundhouse kick, and so on and so forth, right? And I do think many people chose to just attack with that step-through punch at each other for too long, especially at the higher ranks. But many people didn't, right? And so the expectation is, if you're a black belt working with another black belt, your one steps, your single point attack is very focused, and it could be very non-telegraphic. It could be anything. It could be a ridge hand, a quick jab, an attempted grab, things like that. And I also compound attacks. Instead of 1 steps, 2 and 3 steps, but not like traditional 3 steps where someone does a lunge punch and then steps and does a lunge punch and steps and does a lunge punch, and you step back and block and then kick. That just didn't exist in that school because they did not believe in backing up at all for any reason, which I'm going to backtrack and say sometimes backing up and springing back is good, but they would much rather you hit and move to the side, or move to the side and then hit, or redirect and then hit and then move to the side, or move to the side and hit and then redirect the person, etc., etc. The level I was at, there was not much grappling, but I have seen them do grappling type things, and they preferred to end grappling quickly by going for a vital point or escaping, right? Which I agree with. So it's a great methodology. I believe that at each belt level, and I've always incorporated this into my training, my personal workouts with people and my students. Whenever I was teaching them, I'm like, if you're a white belt, if you're new to this, yeah, you're going to do some basic 1 steps. But then, you've been here 4 months. Okay, you work with so and so who's been here an equal amount of time, and do your techniques against a skip side kick. Start working in how to defend against the most common punching attack, which is that big right hand haymaker from a right-handed person in the left lead, or maybe coming at you with a lead left hook. Okay, a big haymaker type stuff. Got to learn how to defend against that, right? Which means you have to sort of, teach your techniques accordingly. And where do you get these techniques from? You have kata. If you have kung fu, you have forms 200 and 300 moves that you never get to practice, right? And also, your initial one step might be he comes at you with a step through punch and you begin your technique, and then he turns with another punch in the middle of your flow and you have to adapt and try to finish your technique, right? But later on, I do this with my senior students and even my junior students a lot. Come at me with anything. All right, what? I'm like, just anything, just come at me. If you get me, that means I lose. And then I defend, and then I'm like, all right, give me 3 attacks, or give me 2 attacks, or like, what? I'm like, it doesn't matter. I'm trying to adapt and spontaneously respond. And they're like, you mean anything? I'm like, yeah. And then I do that to them, and I go slow with them. And then they adapt. It's like you're developing spontaneity. That's the word. Now, let me get some tea. I'm getting tongue-tied because I think I'm talking too fast. You develop spontaneity, flow, reaction. And if you get hit, hopefully you've got some control. You can do this with or without padding. You learn how to continue your flow even if you get hit. You learn how to adapt. It's no big deal. A punch got through. If it doesn't knock you clean out or break something, you got to go. Actually, the way fights are, if a punch gets through and your jaw's broken and you're not unconscious, you still got to keep on fighting. Nowadays, fighters like to sit on top of you, mount you and ground and pound you, and you might get killed that way. So develop the flow, develop the spontaneity, develop the unconscious and subconscious use of your martial art techniques. Use your forms and your sparring experience and the experience of the seniors around you to develop techniques and counters. Yes, at some point things are going to be kind of planned out. If I'm learning a new technique with another black belt I've never used before, I'm like, come at me with a step through punch, half speed, let me figure out where this fits on the human body. Okay, now I'll do it to you. Let me see how you do with it. All right, now come in fast. Pow, pow. All right, I think I've got it. Now, I'm going to try to keep applying this technique. Come at me with punches only. Bam, bam. Okay, oh, that one got through. All right. Hey, you know what? If I modify the technique a little bit this way, it works better. Okay, come at me with kicks. Okay, easy against front kicks. Oh, that, you did a Muay Thai roundhouse kick. That kick exists all over the world. Okay, but I've got to do this first, and then I can apply the same technique. You understand? You have to increase the resistance, vary the angles as you go up in levels of experience and develop all kinds of variations. If you're doing sport martial art, it's the same thing. You're learning boxing, you just go stationary, give me that jab. Okay, I'll practice slapping it aside. Okay, let me practice slipping it, right? Now, let's move around and you get to throw the jab at whatever timing you want, but you can only throw the jab. All right, I practice my response, and I do the same. Then it's like, all right, well, give me a jab cross. You may prearrange it. Give me a jab cross to the face. Later, it may be jab to the face, right cross to the body, and then, okay, now you get to pick, right? Same thing for anything else. There's the progression from basic one-step sparring to compound sparring, like 2, 3, 4-step, to semi-free sparring, where you kind of maneuver, move around, maybe even incorporate fakes, to multiple person drills, to incorporating weapons, to incorporating sport techniques, kung fu techniques, grappling techniques, etc., etc. You can only, believe it or not, for most people, you can only get so good and learn so much from just sparring. You've got to incorporate other things, and I feel like the one-step sparring with the step-through punch just to practice for the next test is a waste of opportunity. You cannot get black belt level skill from white belt level resistance.